Peace and blessings, everyone. Good evening, morning, or afternoon, wherever you are watching this. I wanted to tap in with you all. First and foremost, Assalamu alaikum. I pray everyone is doing well upon this January 15th, 2024, or whenever you choose to watch this video. I'm not going to be long with my intro. I just want to welcome you to the Art of Living Live. This is the YouTube channel of Imani Muhammad. We spend our time and energy not only talking about the ways and the art of living, because there is a true way to live this thing called life, but more importantly, we always want to bring you knowledge, wisdom, and understanding from a perspective that is universal, that no matter what spirituality, what religion, what way of life you ascribe to, we would like to bring all of those thoughts and thinkings to the table so that we can understand that truth is truth and the reality of God is always present and always resides within us. So with that being said, y'all, today is a holiday and a day that typically here in America, we celebrate the birth date of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., usually on a Monday. That gives us a day off. I think it's important for us to truly understand and celebrate some of our fallen soldiers, so to speak. Whenever we lose someone, whenever we lose, through the hands of the government or hands of the powers that be, I think it's important for us to truly understand who these individuals are, and not from the same government entity or the same perspective that actually murdered him, if that makes sense. So I think it's important for us to always look deeper and go deep into our Black leaders and understand that our Black leaders that have been taken from us might have had a different message that gets promoted or portrayed into the mainstream, if that makes sense. Dr. King was actually very hated among the United States government and among many folks that had powers and had weaponry and authority to do something about it. So he was never, I won't say never, he was not liked by the masses. He was not someone who people in larger corporations and folks actually backed. Dr. King was someone who challenged the system and challenged the entire government and the institutions that we live in, and challenged them to do differently and put their money where their mouth was, right? And so you would think, and a lot of our generation of young people think, that Dr. King was favored and loved by this government, which is not accurate. Very similar to how they portray Malcolm X, to this in this day and time. Malcolm X was definitely someone who this government wanted no parts of. However, once they die, you can rewrite the history of these individuals and give them stamps and street names after them. And so I want to take today to use my page, use my platform to play an interview. It's about 45 minutes, but this is an interview with the editor of the Final Call newspaper, which I believe is the best newspaper in the United States, period. So it's a conversation with the editor of the Final Call newspaper, Brother Richard Muhammad, and another brother who they're diving into the they are diving into the truth and the facts about Dr. King in a way that will give and shed light on Dr. King and who he really was and is. The Final Call newspaper also is a newspaper that typically gives an unbiased perspective. It is biased in the sense of highlighting Black people and Black community in a different way, but it's unbiased in terms of providing truth. And so there's always a cover story on the Final Call newspaper. And so this interview is the editor of the Final Call newspaper discussing the cover story of Dr. King. So I just want to play it for us. Again, you may learn something about Dr. King that they're not teaching you in schools, that they're not teaching you in the textbooks, that they're not teaching you really anywhere. And so take this moment, again, depending on when you tap in, how you tap in, but definitely take this moment to recognize and give respect to Dr. King in a way that is giving truth and facts about who he is in this day and time and who he was while he was still living amongst us. All right. So I'm going to share my screen. I would love for someone to put in the chat the number 1, making sure that the audio sounds good when I push play. All right. So let's go here. You all can see this, hopefully. Put this side by side. And let's go ahead and push play. All right, y'all. Share this out to anyone that may want to know more about Dr. King in a real way.
Now you can get the same uncompromising truth you've come to expect from the Final Call newspaper on all your connected devices. Subscribe to the Final Call Digital Edition today. Go to subscribe.finalcalldigital.com.
Peace. Assalamu alaikum. We are back with another edition of Behind the Final Call cover story. Man, I'm looking forward to this week. Of course, the cover story is The Last Days of Dr. King. And very powerful article. And of course, we're looking forward to this wonderful show. Please take the opportunity before I bring up our editor. Make sure that you're sharing the show. Go ahead, let your friends know. And with that said, let's bring up Brother Naba, the editor of the Final Call newspaper. Brother Naba, why this cover story?
Well, Brother Troy, assalamu alaikum. Certainly, we know that January 17th, the country will again separate the King holiday and named in honor of the civil rights leader and martyr, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We thought it was important to delve into and show Dr. King in the last couple years of his life, basically from April 4th, 1967, where he made a major speech at Riverside Church and he condemned the Vietnam War. He called the U.S. government the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. That speech got him condemned by almost 200 newspapers. He was condemned by and he was disavowed by civil rights leaders and those who had been allies when he was talking about integration that he said in a different speech had not cost the country anything. But when he started talking about the Vietnam War and U.S. foreign policy and a single solitary definition for what nonviolence meant, that he was saying to the U.S. government and saying to the American people that if he was calling for nonviolence at home, he should call for nonviolence abroad. So, I mean, this is, I think, most often around this time of year, most often you will hear, again, I Have a Dream, speech from 1963, March on Washington. but the Dr. King of 63 and what he's talking about and what he says in 67. Because a year later to the day, April 4th, 1968, Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis. And he was assassinated because he had come to help the garbage workers with their strike. So this evolving, very much aware of the dangers, very much seeing the consequences, was speaking boldly, and not only speaking boldly, but also organizing against the Vietnam War. Dr. King also stood with Muhammad Ali, who was then in the Nation of Islam and the boxing champion of the world, when Muhammad Ali refused to go into the draft. Dr. King supported him. So I think one of the things that's important for us to understand, and in particular when we're talking about honoring heroes and designating people, we cannot lie. Dr. King stood very strong. He was condemned by leading blacks, the NAACP, Whitney Young of the Urban League, Carl Rowan, who was a major player in the administration of then President Lyndon B. Johnson. He was criticized by Thurgood Marshall, who was Solicitor General at the time and would go on to become a very highly respected Supreme Court justice. So this was no easy road. There were death threats. His organization, Dr. King's organization, SCLC, lost donations. As much as 40% of donations or more stopped coming in because the feeling was that Dr. King should not speak to international issues, that he should not criticize U.S. foreign policy, that he should not worry about U.S. militarism and warmongering, that he should continue along the path of civil rights in America. But the principled man that Dr. King was, there was just no way. And I think, we've heard people talk at different times about part of this was also as Dr. King was moving not just to eradicate laws in the South, but looking at things like housing discrimination in the North. So, for example, Dr. King came to Chicago. He led a march. He was pelted with rocks and bottles in Marquette Park because he was calling for the desegregation of housing in the city. And so we see this man who was stalked by the FBI, isolated. Even people that worked with him for years, like Bayard Rustin, condemned him, did not want to have anything to do with him in terms of his message about the Vietnam War. So this was a very critical time. Very critical. The FBI, of course, was stalking him and trying to get him to commit suicide. So we have to be careful that people don't give us a version of a man and then say, this is the man that you should follow. This was Dr. King's words were very revolutionary at the time. I mean, they were really highly charged. Like I said, the day after he made the speech in Riverside Church, April 4th, 1967, almost 200 newspapers in the country condemned him. J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, condemned him. And so what you're seeing is a man who is not bound by a limited view of justice, but he has a long and a full view of justice. So this, I think, was just a very incredible story that we have, written by Anissa Muhammad, one of our young and up-and-coming writers. Very much worth listening to. We have an interview and a piece from Tavis Smiley, a longtime journalist and media person, who actually wrote a book about this. And we also delve into some of the things that were said at the time. So we want everybody to go to finalcall.com and subscribe and read this article. Very important, very important. And it shows Dr. King's character and really his bravery and his faith, where he refused to back down. He refused to retreat into a safe area. The other thing that we should understand is blacks died disproportionately in Vietnam. So these things are very much we should consider.
Praise to Allah. Thank you. And just the timing of this is just really interesting as we begin to uncover. And one of the things that just, of course, I never pass up an opportunity to give props to the Final Call newspaper, but you just look at that as we look at the Final Call and the picture that's being lifted, and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan has put in energy at lifting up and showing Martin Luther King in a different perspective than what I know I personally grew up, how I saw him as the dreamer. And I think that that definitely that switch in perspectives of King is something that's definitely growing. Of course, with Tavis Malley's book, of course, with what we heard from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan during Justice or Else, is a very important thing that we begin to shift our perspective of those leaders that are put in front of us and how they are portrayed.
Yeah, and it's very important because you don't get the idea of a revolutionary Dr. King. Right. You don't get the idea of a Dr. King who was stalked literally by the FBI, who was under surveillance by the FBI, whose organization was infiltrated by traitors and spies. So the Memphis Commercial Appeal reported some years ago that the Defense Intelligence Agency was in Memphis the day that Dr. King was killed, and that they had him under surveillance. So the more that we tell the truth, now remember, this man was murdered. He was murdered. Shouldn't someone be held accountable for that? Well, you could say James Earl Ray, but many doubt that he did it, and they doubt that he certainly didn't do it alone. Right. So this is again one of those important moments. And if you don't, the thing is, teach me about someone. If I want to be a great basketball player, and I learned something about, let's say, the great Allen Iverson, who played for the 76ers, Philadelphia 76ers in the Professional Football League. Then I try to run my game after Allen Iverson, who was famous for the killer crossover dribble. Likewise with leaders. If I don't see Dr. King as a strong, even revolutionary leader, why would I follow him? If I'm a young man that wants to see militancy, I want to follow somebody that just says, I have a dream. I'm looking for something stronger than that, especially at this time. And so the other thing is that to look at what Dr. King was fighting against yesterday and to see those problems still being waged today. Dr. King was against militarism. He was against spending billions of dollars on weapons and weapons systems. He was against inferior education. He was against the existence of poverty and the degradation of people. He was for the equality of Black people. So as we learn about him, now we can see something that we want to emulate, or even an aspect of his work that is undone that we may want to pick up. But of course, we always say the enemy will never teach you the truth, and he will certainly never teach you the truth of one who was committed to overthrowing, in a sense, or remaking his society. That was Dr. King's commitment. So these things are very important, in particular around this time of year. So, I really encourage everyone to get this copy of the Final Call. to subscribe to the Final Call. Share it with your children. Share it with your grandchildren. Sit down and talk to them about this. Text them and have some kind of conversation so that they don't just grow up thinking Dr. King's only speech was, "I had a dream." And so we also have an article by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan where he talks about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., not a dreamer, but a man evolving toward a common goal for his people. Very powerful article on page 20. You really got to read it. And the minister talks about different messages that Dr. King gave.
Yes, sir.
And how these were bold messages. Where Dr. King talked about, this focus on criminality in the ghettos. But Dr. King called those acts derivative crimes. He said they're small crimes that stem from bigger crimes perpetuated by white people and white society, but they are not punished. So I mean, it's the minister's article is very, very, very powerful.
Yes, sir.
And you really have to talk about it, and I mean, you really have to read it and see what he's talking about, and the depth of his appreciation for the principled stand that Dr. King made, because he was threatened. He lost friends. He lost public opinion. And he was basically told, man, go back, get up off of that. But he refused because he saw this war in Vietnam as being so dangerous. And not only that, did he speak about the war, he also organized against it. And he planned to make ending the war a major issue in the 1968 presidential election. So there's a lot going on here. Way, 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 way different than a man who had a dream. And I think that when we look at what Dr. King endured, then it points back to the power of the federal government. It points back to the influence of defense companies. It leans back to political leaders supporting war as opposed to the development of the American people. But that's not just yesterday. If you read the article by Sister Anissa, if you read my editorial, your president, Joe Biden, just had billions of money allocated for the Defense Department and weapons. So his bill in terms of militarism is bigger than Donald Trump's bill. And Mr. Biden, when you compare his spending on people and that as a priority, in no way is it even comparable. So this is also the importance of teaching people the truth so that they can draw lines and draw parallels and have some analysis of what is going on in the world, as opposed to being spoon-fed or force-fed lies. And as I said in my editorial, you really can't honor Dr. King by telling lies. He was a man of truth who spoke the truth as he saw it. And he should be respected and admired for that. And if we truly respect him and admire him, we would pick up some of the work, his work, that is still left undone.
Praise you to a lot. You kind of took my job, so I don't know what to say now. You went through all the articles. What you need me for? But praise
I don't
you to
know.
a lot. Oh wow, that's where we at.
I'm saying what you want to do? You got the script over there.
So one of the things I think I want to lift, and this is something with all of the always with the paper, in particular with the articles from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, as well as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, is that many of those articles come from previous lectures or previous messages that have been shared by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan or the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And we encourage you to read the original source of those articles, and in some instances, to visit the MP3 or the DVD or the lecture. And I know sometimes we say, I don't buy. I can just go to YouTube and watch the lecture, which in many instances is the case. But we want you to continue to find ways, and we should always be looking for ways in which we can support a cause that's bigger than ourselves. And so I would encourage you to check out this lecture. It's part of the series, The Time and What Must Be Done. It's titled, We Must Unite to Save Our Youth. You can order it. It's available on MP3, download, as well as CD and DVD. And this is part 23 of the 52-part lecture series, The Time and What Must Be Done, delivered on June 15th, 2013. And one thing is really important. Sometimes, I'm reluctant to even share the years because we can misperceive, because this happened, approximately, I guess, about 8 or 9 years ago, that this may not be relevant anymore, or it's not important. That's one of the things about Revelation, is that it talks about the fullness of time, and then even now we'll see even more value into what was given to us yesterday.
Yeah, and the other thing is, you can depend on YouTube if you want.
Yes, sir.
But you might wake up and go to YouTube one day and not be able to find any videos by Mr. Farrakhan. So they've done that before. We've had whole YouTube channels wiped out.
Absolutely.
So I think it's wise for you to have your own library, because you either paid for or downloaded the MP3, or you bought a DVD and you kept a DVD player in the house. But if we think that the enemy, who has now banned the minister on Twitter, banned him on Facebook, sanctioned him in the Senate, sanctioned him in the House, I'm talking about the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives, right? Britain declared him persona non grata years ago, meaning he's not welcome in the country. So do you think, with all of these attacks on this man, that the enemy is going to simply allow you to be able to access the wealth of information and guidance that he's given you? We have to stop being like little children. You better acquire this knowledge for yourself. You better hold on to something that you have control of. Because if you think that the enemy is just going to continue to spread the truth, I mean, he'll do it because Allah makes it happen. And even when they're doing evil, they end up spreading the truth. So we understand that. But go to finalcall.com and subscribe, and go to the Final Call store, Final Call Incorporated, and buy some CDs and some DVDs. And get yourself a DVD player, or get yourself a computer that plays DVDs, and have your own library. Yes. Because this man and the shutdown of information is very critical to their very survival.
Yes, sir. Praise to God. Thank you for sharing. And then this is another side note that aligns with that, is that, even recently, of course, we on Sundays, we have our national broadcast, which we encourage you to check out at NOI.org. And we have our own platform, media.noi.org. But we usually also stream to YouTube. And actually, our YouTube channel was, once again, of course, our official YouTube channel was taken down a few years ago now. And so we've used other different channels on YouTube, but our YouTube channel was down last week. So we weren't even able to stream via YouTube last week. We were still, by Allah's permission, still able to stream to media.noi.org, which we encourage you to check out the lectures that are there. But the reality is that we have to understand, like Brother Naba said, is that even the internet, so there's been discussions that the nation or we should have our own platform, is that when you understand how the internet works, it's a little more complicated than that. Is because we don't own the internet. And so they still have the ability is still there to shut down our access. So once again, as Brother Naba said, make sure that you have your own arsenal, that you have those things and resources that are important, which are the books of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, which are the books by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, having those lectures and that divine guidance that you can access as we're in a time of darkness. Praise be to Allah. Thank you, thank you. So you touched on the editorial, Brother Naba. Lies don't honor Dr. King. So why? Can you kind of give us a little insight in general? What are the thoughts of how do you come up with what the editorial of the week is going to be?
Well, I mean, it depends. Some editorial is related to something that's in the paper. Sometimes it is coverage of something that's not in the paper that we haven't written an article about, but we want to share some analysis and our position, the newspaper's position on it. This one, Don't Tell Lies About the Lies, the editorial, Lies Don't Honor Dr. King. It really was, I was compelled to do it because of another speech. One you probably never heard of. May 13th, right? So you got April 4th, 1967 in New York. April. May 17th, a month later, a little more than a month later, Dr. King is on the West Coast. So he makes this major speech in New York at Riverside Church. He's condemned. About a month later, he's been doing another major speech on May 17th, 1967 at UC Berkeley. And I came across this speech and I just felt it was so incredible because I'd never heard of it at all. And the points that Dr. King made were so poignant and so important that we wanted to give even more context and even more information to his anti-war activity, to show that even though the speech at Riverside Church was monumental, that wasn't the only speech. That even though his speaking out against the war was courageous, that's not all he did. He organized against the war. He was recruiting college students to stand against the war. He was planning on making the 1968 presidential election, right? The 1968 presidential election, he was planning on working to introduce the need for peace and as a major campaign issue. You know, so these are very important things in this speech from May 17th, 1967 at UC Berkeley. The speech was entitled America's Moral Dilemma. I'm going to read just this part. In a speech titled America's Chief Moral Dilemma, delivered on Sproul Plaza at the UC Berkeley, that's UC Berkeley, in California, Dr. King declared, quote, it was us estimated the other day that we spend $500,000 to kill every enemy soldier in Vietnam. So Dr. King was saying at that time, the U.S. was spending $500,000 to kill one Vietnamese soldier, right? Then Dr. King said, quote, when you look at the other side, it's tragic. We spend only $53 a year for every person that's considered poverty-stricken. Half of that goes for salaries for those who are not poor. Again, the choice, military spending, armaments, weapons, versus spending on the development of people. It's another thing that Dr. King said. Again, this is the speech, May 17th, 1967, UC Berkeley. So if you're going to play a speech for young people this King Day, if you're going to assemble people to have them talk about Dr. King and what he stood for, I'd like to suggest you screen this movie. Excuse me, you screen this speech. And let people who listen about what was said yesterday. And then look at America's military policies and posture today. Look at the budget choices that are being made today. Look at the money being spent today. You got a president that cannot get a domestic spending program passed at all. But huge spending bill for the Pentagon and the military. He got that. So last quote from Dr. King. This is again Dr. King speaking May 17th, 1967 at UC Berkeley. This is another quote from Dr. King. Quote, I never intend to adjust myself to racial segregation and discrimination. I never intend to become adjusted to religious bigotry. I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few. I never intend to adjust myself to the madness of militarism. This is Dr. King. This is Dr. King. And so if we're going to celebrate this man, we should know something about him. So we are trying to offer information to our people so that they can get a much deeper understanding of this man. And not just what he was yesterday. What do his lessons from yesterday represent today? You got the President of the United States in Georgia today talking about voting rights that are under attack. But in his speech at UC Berkeley, Dr. King was talking about civil rights legislation and the weak enforcement of civil rights legislation. And he talked about it after Reconstruction. He said, you did it again, meaning the government gave us some quote-unquote civil rights legal protections in 1957. Then you did it again, 1965. He said, but all of them have been weak in their application. And now we got a president that said to black people, I got your back because you saved me. And he will not even stand up fully and act to preserve voting rights, not just for black people, but for the entire country. Voting rights, the ability to vote, the ability to cast a ballot. This is fundamental to what you call democracy. And so if you got a system where people are denying other people the right to vote, do you even have a democracy? You got a sham of a democracy. And this is why the teaching of truth is so important, so that you can draw the parallels between Dr. King's work. What is America doing in Iran? Why is America armed to the teeth? Why is America supporting the ugliness and the madness and the abuses of Israel against the Palestinians? Why is America so heavily involved in Africa? Why is America so heavily involved in the Middle East? And why is none of that related to self-determination for these people? These are the same issues we're talking about today that Dr. King talked about yesterday. So don't stop at I Have a Dream. Don't stop in 1963. Don't let somebody shake your hand and pat you on the back and talk about how great America is and how far she's come. Read what the minister says about that in his article. Read what he says about the symbolism of Dr. King's memorial in Washington, D.C. and conditions that still exist in the country. So, of course, we got other national news. We got a piece about the life and legacy of Young Dolph, brother, a rapper who was killed in Memphis. We have other pieces the killing of a by police officers in Austin, Minnesota. And this happened to be one of our young brothers that immigrated from Africa. In the international section, we got a very good story where you got people saying in 2022, let's tax the rich. These billionaires that added 102 billion to their fortunes in 2021. Then we've got now the anniversary of America's assassination of General Soleimani, who was a great American military leader and someone fighting against the forces of ISIS or Daesh, as they're called. Iranians are still hurting and vowing to continue to work to get vengeance or justice. Tensions in Libya around voting. Ever since your president, Barack Obama, and his Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, destroyed Libya, and Colonel Muammar Gaddafi was murdered, you've seen nothing but hell and chaos. And that hell and chaos in North Africa has swept all the way through West Africa, now going into East Africa, and sometimes even into Central Africa. Because it was Brother Gaddafi who said, when America and the Europeans were supporting these people that were rising up against him in Libya, he said, these are the same people you are fighting. ISIS, Daesh rather. And of course, he was destroyed. His regime was destroyed. So now you have Africans fleeing, trying to cross into Europe, many of them dying because they're trying to get from basically Libya to Europe. Or so they're traveling to Europe, and we've already learned about the enslavement of Black people in Libya today. Now that Brother Gaddafi is no longer there. So we got other articles, and we got articles by Brother Jabril, Mother Tanetta, The Spiritual Teachings of the Nation of Islam. We got something in a nice section we call Sister Space, which is a feature by for and about women. And this week, we've got a piece called, it talks about the U.S. and Canada's war on indigenous women. Piece written by Sister Chantel Muhammad. We got an Africa column. And we got a very special feature about a group in the nation that is really working on the development and the upliftment of women. That is the I Deny. And this is a special program about the development of women by women. So you really want to see this, you really want to read this, you want to get good information and understand what's happening in your world today.
Praise you to Allah. Thank you. Of course, a lot of uplifting information and what's going on in our world and society today. But on a lighter note, of course, there have been recent loss of lives of many of our heroes, and one that's covered this edition of the Final Call newspaper, of course, is our brother Sidney Poitier, a life of art and activism. Can you touch on that?
I mean, again, we may know Sidney Poitier as a great actor, but in addition to that, he was involved in the struggle for our people. So I think part of his life's lesson is a life well lived is a life of purpose. Not simply a life of celebrity or a life of ease, but harnessing that celebrity to the struggle of your people. Great actor, fine actor, celebrated actor. But at the end of the day, a man who used his fame and his fortune to try to help move our people forward.
Yes, sir. Praise due to Allah. And I don't want to mess up his name, because when we talked briefly before, for those who don't know, and we probably
James Ntume.
Our brother James Ntume, for those who may not know, a friend of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, a very powerful brother in our movement, of course, in the arts, but as well as in activism. So may Allah be pleased with him, and may the burden of his loss be lifted from his family. So
Yeah,
Am
I think
losing you guys?
most of us are. I think most of us are proud of his song "Juicy Fruit," and that song was sampled by the rapper Notorious Big, Notorious B.I.G., and it still exists today on places like TikTok. In addition to that, Brother Ntume was a radio host and he was a fine musician, but he was someone again involved with the struggle for our people. So inshallah, we will be reporting more about him, his life, his legacy, his contribution next week. We thank Allah for him. I had the pleasure of meeting him, and you just happened to be one of my favorite songs when I was growing up, so to speak.
We won't go too much into that one. But since you touched on some of the coverage for next week, what else can we be looking for in next week's edition of the Final Call newspaper?
Well, I mean, I think you can look for continued coverage of these natural disasters. We just recently had reports of billion-dollar disasters striking in this country in recent years. What is that? We're going to, inshallah, get billions of dollars lost because Black men are underemployed, not employed, incarcerated, and what that economic impact is. So we got a few things going. But stay tuned. Share this video, like it, follow, read the Final Call, subscribe, hit us up, let us know what you think. Support media that supports you.
Praise to Allah. Thank you. Another edition of Behind the Final Call cover story. And like I said, I believe I shared this on our show last week. And I don't know how much you experienced this, Brother Naba, but people tell me they actually watched the show and that they enjoyed it when we were off, that that they missed it. But I don't know unless I don't go back and read the comments. I don't really hear enough from the people. I hear this is social media. I want to see it in the comments. I want to see what's going on in the chat, not just the personal conversation. So we definitely encourage and like to hear from more of you all. We do appreciate those who do share and those who are sharing comments, but we definitely are encouraged by hearing your feedback. So please continue to watch and share. Until next time, any closing words?
Well, may Allah bless us all in the new year, grant us peace, grant us his strength to be able to withstand whatever we may be faced with. If you've got young people interested in journalism, interested in becoming writers, or I'm looking for a whole cadre of young people to mentor. Where are you? You scared? You scared to come out and use your talent to work for your own people? And you young, gifted, Black, you're supposed to be strong. I mean, what, you scared now? Well, it's too late to be scared. We got some great young people working for us. We're looking for more. So stop hiding under that rock and come on out here. Put your talent to work. Let us showcase your work. So if you know some young people, you got some, have them with us, because we're the future. And we got to have young people to do that.
Praise you to Allah. Thank you. And I can't leave out. We're looking forward to hearing words from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan via Student Minister Ishmael Muhammad on this Thursday, January 13th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, or that's probably actually 12 p.m. Eastern Time, which is 11 a.m. Central Time. And you can tune in at NOI.org, the daughter of one of our.
All right, y'all. So that was just a little different perspective on who Dr. King is and was and who he is to our community. I think it's important for us to always, as Brother Naba said, important for us to understand who we're celebrating, so-called celebrating on this day, right? And so again, hopefully there was some information and something and some things and facts that you may have learned today around Dr. King, and more importantly, finding different ways to celebrate and recognize, our fallen leaders in our community. And again, I think there's a lot that he said, but one point that I wanted to highlight even more and just stress that he mentioned that, and this is what happens with our leaders and why they don't want us to know the truth. Because if you are a young person growing up in America and you have this revolutionary spirit, or you see things happening in your community and you want to produce some change, if they can isolate and never share truth about people that came before us, right, that laid a foundation, that did the same work that you want to do and have the same spirit that you have, if we can disconnect that, if they can disconnect the role model, so to speak, then you will just sit with those thoughts and just say, oh, I wish I could do something. But if you really knew the truth about Dr. King and really knew the truth about a lot of our leaders in society, then you may be able to match up your characteristics or align your characteristics to them. And who's to say what we could do as a community and as a nation when we see that, oh, I have the same thoughts that Dr. King had, or I had the same thoughts that so-and-so had, right? But if we cut off the truth and cut off the knowledge, then you disconnect the people from identity, you disconnect the people from culture, and you disconnect the people from the reality of who they are. And that has more damaging impact than anything that you can ever think about. When you lose your identity, your culture, and your essence of who you are as a people, then anything can happen to you, right? You can believe anything. You blow with the wind. What they say tomorrow is what is true yesterday, or whatever it is. Whatever they say, you're going to believe, because you are not rooted in identity, culture, and who you are. So clips like this, interviews like this, information like this that reconnects you to your leaders, that reconnects you to the people that lay the foundation for you and I to stand on, that is empowering, that's inspirational, and that is motivating. So I pray that there is something of this interview that inspired you, and just, if nothing else, reshare it. Share it out to the world. Let people know. Again, this was posted on the YouTube channel, the Collective 9, I believe. And so all I did was share it on my live. One, there should be more than 100 people that viewed that. That's what their numbers were. So hopefully we can get 100 and match that. But more importantly, just continue to share it out. All right. Thank you all to my subscribers. I appreciate you for tapping in and always just subscribing. If nothing else, you just subscribe to the channel and continue to let us grow and do more impact with this channel and this media. All right. Drop a $5 minimum, maybe $1, $10, whatever you want. Make a donation to keep this platform going, and for us to bring on different folks so we can interview them and bring more knowledge, wisdom, and understanding to our lives. And of course, always under the premise of the art of living, which are the universal principles of knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. All right. Peace, y'all.